What do you get when you take people dedicated to their craft, going through leaps and bounds, acting on their plan of action even in the midst of adversity? You get a heartfelt story so organic and becoming so genuine, which forces you to be a part of their moment, joining these experiences as if you were a part of them. These are stories of people, just like you and I, reflecting from within on how they've used adversity to catapult their lifestyle, their vision, and their goals to becoming successful. Here at the Stories to Savor Network, we welcome you to this wonderful heartfelt show entitled Reflections from Inside. So the next time you go through trials and tribulations, or having self-doubt, consider to let the stories resonate with you in hopes to inspire you to believe that you can do whatever you set your mind to do.
Thank you for joining me for this compelling episode of Reflections from Inside. I'm your host, Robin Rocks. My next guest is no stranger to controversy. His name emblazoned on headlines from media outlets ranging from the Chicago Tribune to the Hollywood Reporter for taking a definitive stance against systemic issues in and around his community of Oak Park, Illinois. While he lost his Democratic bid to unseat 20-year incumbent Danny Davis in Illinois' 7th Congressional District, he received 26% of the vote and continues to push for equity in his community. He is the founder and director of a local nonprofit and was featured in the Starz documentary series, America to Me, directed by Steve James. I'm delighted to introduce you to Air Force veteran, public school teacher, and community activist, Anthony Clark. Anthony, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
I'm glad you're here. So let's dive right in. Before we talk about the headlines, let's give our viewers a little history about where you came from. I know that you have worked in many communities in the Chicagoland area. Tell us a little bit about where you've been and how you got back to Oak Park.
Definitely. So, born and raised around the Chicagoland area. My mother and father, Blanche and Ronald Clark, shout out to them. Love them to death. My best friends, definitely.
Yeah.
They're from the Morgan Park area, south side of Chicago. So at the age of 5, they scraped and scratched together enough money to move me out of the community because they were interested in providing me with what they deemed would be better opportunities.
Okay.
So they identified Oak Park. It was kind of like coming to America when Hakeem and Simi spin, the globe, and they pointed to Queens. They were
that's
just
how
like,
you landed on Oak Park?
That's how we landed in Oak Park. They were looking around doing some research, and they were like, Oak Park.
Yeah.
So moved to Oak Park at the age of 5.
That worked out though, at least.
It did, for the most part. Went through the school systems within the community. Started at private school, then went into public school because I got kicked out of the private school. Went through the public school systems, graduated. And from there, just trying to find myself. I didn't really know what I wanted to do at that time in my life, when I was a young teen. So I was just trying to figure it out, enter into manhood. So I ended up moving to Atlanta briefly, kind of doing some soul searching and so on and so forth. Actually ended up getting into a little trouble in Atlanta. But thankfully, throughout my life, I've always had my familial support. My mother and father have always been study rocks. They've always been there for me and supporting me. So anytime I've stumbled, I recognized that I didn't have to pick myself up on my own.
You weren't alone.
Yeah, I wasn't alone. Yeah. They were always there to help pick me up, help dust me off, and help me to refocus. So, I truly appreciate having that stability and that foundation.
Yeah.
So when I got into some trouble in Atlanta, I had to reevaluate my life, figure out where I wanted to go. I was feeling kind of guilty at the time because I felt like my parents sacrificed so much for me, and there were no excuses. They really weren't. So
and
I
you
just
recognized that on your own.
Correct.
Yeah.
Definitely. And at the time, I realized my great-grandfather, had served in the military. My grandfather had served in the military. My father had served in the military. I have an older brother that served in the military.
Your whole family.
Whole family, essentially. So I said, you know what, why not? This may be an opportunity to remove myself from some negative influences, to make my own money so I don't have to depend on my parents, and kind of refocus, and figure out what I wanted to do. So I entered into, the United States Air Force. Served 6 years active duty.
Wow. Thank you for your service.
No problem at all. As I tell people all the time, I wasn't a hero, but I did indeed serve with heroes. So it was an important experience for me. It allowed me to find myself. It allowed me to mature. Thankfully I had some wonderful supervisors that even allowed me to go to school. So I obtained my first 2 degrees while I was in the military.
Nice.
Best
way to do it, right?
Definitely. But essentially, I'm a disabled veteran. I have PTSD and I have a condition known as Behçet's. So it's an autoimmune deficiency where my immune system's overactive. And because of that, I was medically discharged honorably from the military after 6 years of serving. And again,
Otherwise you might.
I might have stayed in.
Yeah.
I might have stayed in. So again, you come at that crossroads again in life where you have to figure out what's next. So just doing research. At that time, I had a bachelor's in communications and a master's in criminal justice. I was able to obtain a master's degree while in, and I thought to myself initially I was going to do 20 years, and then I identified the criminal justice system as systemically broken. So I thought at that time that I would move into the criminal justice system and try to work inside and outside the system to facilitate systemic change.
Yeah.
But due to my disability, I was
wasn't an
precluded.
option.
Right, I could not enter into the service that I wanted to.
Is
So I
that
think-
kind of how you got into teaching?
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
So I remember sitting there and thinking, well, the criminal justice system is broken. What other system is broken where black and brown males, black and brown women, and they are disproportionately represented?
Right.
And again, you start thinking of the school to prison pipeline and the issues that exist prior to even entering into the criminal justice system. So I said, I'll become a teacher.
Okay.
And that's how it happened. So.
And I know that you taught at the Kenwood Academy.
Correct,
in
correct,
Hyde Park, right?
correct. So when I first came back, I actually taught at alternative school in the Austin community because when you teach alternative, at times you don't need necessarily a teaching degree. And I was attending school at National Louis University to obtain my master's degree in special education. So I taught at alternative school for 2 years. From there, I went to a charter school in Humboldt Park, a SPITA, Murta Ramirez Computer Science High School. And then from there, I ended up at Kenwood Academy after I finished my master's degree and, so on and so forth. So Kenwood
A really
was,
good foundation. then.
wow, and Kenwood was a powerful experience. Seeing a lot of black excellence, and it was life-changing.
So what brought you back to Oak Park then?
Definitely. Well, someone that's always had their eye on, again, systemic issues and, how to facilitate systemic change. My parents are still in the Oak Park community. I now have a lot of family that live in the Oak Park community, still a lot of friends. So I pay attention to a lot of the issues that exist in Oak Park.
Sure.
Similar to when I was in the military, I thought I was going to stay at Kenwood. It was a great school. At the time, the principal was Dr. Gregory Jones. He was like a mentor to me. But I remember opening the paper one day, and the Wednesday Journal, a local paper in Oak Park, because I still was receiving it, and it essentially stated that the school board and the administration that were finally ready to address, they call it an achievement gap, I like to call it an opportunity gap, but the academic achievement gap that existed at the school. And they were forming a committee to address these issues. So I immediately called my father.
Wheelhouse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I immediately called my father and said, Dad, we have to get involved. And so he and I got involved with the committee.
Nice.
And based upon that work, the administration at the time asked me to come back. They knew I graduated from there, knew I had ties to the
Okay.
community. They were impressed with many of the things that I was sharing and many of my ideas. So they asked me to come back to the community and work at the school. And that's how I ended up back there teaching.
That's a fantastic story, and I'd like to talk more about that when we get back. When we return, we're going to talk to Anthony a little bit more about his time at Oak Park and River Forest High School and what his relationship is like with the administration.